this man or his parents causing him to be blind? Jesus said, you're asking the wrong question. You're looking for someone to blame. There is no such cause-effect here. Look instead for what God can do. We need to be energetically at work for the one who sent me here, working while the sun shines. When night falls, the workday is over. For as long as I am in the world, there is plenty of light. I am the world's light. He said this and then spit in the dust, made a clay paste with the saliva, rubbed the paste on the blind man's eyes, and said, go wash at the pool of Siloam. Siloam means sent. The man went and washed and saw. Soon the town was buzzing. His relatives and those who year after year had seen him as a blind man begging were saying, why, isn't this the man we knew who sat here and begged? Others said, it's him all right. But others objected, it's not the same man at all. It just looks like him. And he said, it's me, the very one. They said, how did you get your eyes opened? A man named Jesus made a paste and rubbed it on my eyes and told me, go to Siloam and wash, and I did what he said. When I washed, I saw. So where is he? I don't know. They marched the man to the Pharisees. This day, when Jesus made the paste and healed his blindness, was the Sabbath. The Pharisees grilled him again on how he had come to see. He said, he put clay paste on my eyes, and I washed, and now I see. Some of the Pharisees said, obviously this man can't be from God. He doesn't keep the Sabbath. Others countered, how can a bad man do miraculous, God-revealing things like this? There was a split in their ranks. They came back at the blind man. You're the expert. He opened your eyes. What do you say about him? He said, he's a prophet. The Jews didn't believe it. Didn't believe the man was blind to begin with, so they called the parents of the man, now bright-eyed with sight, and they asked them, is this your son, the one you say was born blind? So how is it that he now sees? His parents said, we know he is our son, and we know he was born blind. But we don't know how he came to see. Haven't a clue about who opened his eyes. Why don't you ask him? He's a grown man. He can speak for himself. His parents were talking like this because they were intimidated by the Jewish leaders, who had already decided that anyone who took a stand that this was the Messiah would be kicked out of the meeting place. That's why his parents said, ask him. He's a grown man. They called the man back a second time, the man who had been blind, and told him, give credit to God. We know this man is an impostor. He replied, I know nothing about that one way or the other, but I know one thing for sure. I was blind. I now see. They said, what did he do to you? And how did he open your eyes? I've told you over and over, and you haven't listened. Why do you want to hear it again? Are you so eager to become his disciples? With that, they jumped all over him. You might be a disciple of that man, but we are disciples of Moses. We know for sure that God spoke to Moses, but we have no idea where this man even comes from. The man replied, this is amazing. You claim to know nothing about him, but the fact is, he opened my eyes. It's well known that God isn't at the beck and call of sinners, but listens carefully to anyone who lives in reverence and does his will. That someone opened the eyes of a man born blind and has never been heard of, ever. If this man didn't come from God, he wouldn't be able to do anything. They said, you're nothing but dirt. How dare you take that tone with us? And then they threw him out in the street. Jesus heard that they'd thrown him out and went and found him, and he asked him, do you believe in the Son of Man? The man said, point him out to me, sir, so that I can believe in him. Jesus said, you're looking right at him. Don't you recognize my voice? Master, I believe, the man said, and worshipped him. Jesus then said, I came into the world to bring everything into the clear light of day, making all the distinctions clear so that those who have never seen will see, and those who have made a great pretense of seeing will be exposed as blind. Some Pharisees overheard him and said, does that mean you're calling us blind? Jesus said, if you were really blind, you would be blameless. But since you claim to see everything so well, you're accountable for every fault and failure. The Oxford comma. I'm a big fan. Big fan of the Oxford comma. I mean, from a writing standpoint, it seems to make everything much more clear. Wouldn't you agree? Any fans of the Oxford comma here? Thank you. Thank you. I mean, for example, I like spaghetti, comma, meatballs, and ice cream. Or, I like spaghetti, comma, meatballs, comma, and ice cream. So one could read that and say, I like all three of those things individually. Another could look at it and say, I like spaghetti, and I like meatballs and ice cream together, but not individually. Makes sense, huh? Yeah, it seems really trivial, just a minor technicality, but sometimes those technicalities can be rather costly. Just ask Chris. Chris was a milk delivery driver in Maine. And one day he was making his deliveries, it was rather late, and the guy at the store that he was delivering to said, Chris, how many hours have you worked this week? You're here so late. He says, oh, I've put in about 60 hours this week. And he says, oh, good for you. Good for you. You're going to get overtime. He says, oh, no. I'm exempt. I don't get overtime. I only get paid for 40 hours. The guy says, oh, hopefully the state of Maine doesn't find out about that, because that's illegal. You work 40 hours, you get paid for 40 hours. You work more, you get paid more. And he says, no, but isn't there some exemption thingy where I don't get paid more? He says, I don't know, man. I would look at the law if I were you, because you should probably be getting paid. I mean, you're not the administration or management, you're a delivery driver. It doesn't seem like it would apply to you. And so Chris went and he looked at the law. He looked at the rules, and I had to write it down because it's kind of long. It said, those who are exempt from getting paid overtime, okay, are those who are in canning, comma, processing, comma, preserving, comma, freezing, comma, drying, comma, marketing, comma, storing, comma, packing for shipment or distribution of perishable foods. No comma. So one could read that and say that a person who is in the packing for the shipment and distribution does not have to be paid overtime. Okay? But anybody else does. Right? He's a driver. He's not in the packing process. But if there was a comma in there, it could say that anybody who packs for shipment, comma, or distribution, which would be driving, right? And so this led to a $10 million class action suit against the milk company. And a judge reviewed it and says, yeah, there's enough merit here, we can go forward with it. So the case is still in court, but this minor technicality could cost them a whole bunch of dough. It's kind of interesting. Thank God I'm a fan of the Oxford comma. Feel bad for them. Technicalities. That's what the Pharisees were latching onto that day, the technicality that Jesus had healed on the Sabbath. It wasn't the fact that he opened the eyes of a man who'd been born blind. That didn't matter. It was the fact that he did it on the Sabbath. So obviously, this man must be a sinner. I mean, look at him. He doesn't observe the laws. He doesn't follow the rules of our religion. He goes out there doing his trickery, his deceitful magic, and he does it on the Sabbath of all days. What a wretched human being this man must be. What a terrible sinner. The problem is the Pharisees were missing the picture, just like the milk company was missing the picture. When people work, they deserve to get paid. When a man takes spit in mud, yuck, and rubs it on a dude's eyes who has never seen one day in his life, and all of a sudden he can see, something miraculous, something big, something huge has happened. But instead they were focused on the trivialities. He did it on the Sabbath. This man is no good. It's clear. Remember times we've heard that man or that woman is not a real Christian. They don't believe this, they don't believe that, they don't believe in a literal resurrection, they don't believe in Adam and Eve as literal people, they don't believe... That person isn't a real Christian. He's not born again. How many times have we heard that? Point the finger and tell a person that they're not a real Christian. Interesting thing was I was having a conversation just the other day at a wedding and this guy was giving me his stance on how the church should be, and how we are all hypocrites, but God's grace saves us, and the balance between law and grace, and da-da-da. And I'm like, I don't want to have this conversation with you. I want to finish the wedding and go. I've got things to do today. But I was like, yeah, I've had this conversation before. All the technicalities, but I thought, you know what? If Jesus walked in the door, most churches would probably kick him out. Right? This long-haired, radical, loving and accepting everybody, revolutionary guy. Oh, imagine all the trouble he'd stir up in a church. They'd kick him out. That. Right? Because sometimes people focus on the wrong things. The big picture goes completely missed. There's a certain spiritual blindness that exists within all of us, and we fail to see what's most important. That big picture. There have been other blind men in the Bible. Let's consider one, blind Bartimaeus. It's kind of a cool name. If I ever have another kid, I think I'll name him Bartimaeus. Even if it's a girl, why not? Or not. Bartimaeus. Actually, it's kind of a weird name because Bar is Hebrew and Timaeus is Greek, which tells us that this is an allegorical story, that there was no Bartimaeus. It doesn't take away from the story, it doesn't make it fake, but it just means that this is a story teaching us something, not about the importance of this factual person. Bar means son, son of Timaeus. Well, who the heck was Timaeus? Well, Jesus would have been very familiar there in that Greek Hellenistic culture with Plato, who in one of his last writings, and maybe his very last writing, wrote about the story of Timaeus. Timaeus was part of a court of people who was having a conversation with Socrates. And Socrates, upon the second day of his discussion with his people, says, "Where's the fourth? There were 4 of you yesterday here entertaining me. Now the 3 of you are going to have to work harder." And so Timaeus starts discoursing with them, and Socrates goes into this, not so much of a dialogue as a discourse, explaining about the origins of the universe, and how God created everything, including the body and the human soul, and which supersedes which, and eventually comes to the point where he says that within each of us there is a divine fire, a divine light that emanates from our eyes. And when we look into the eyes of another, those 2 lights intersect and create a manifestation, right? So that it's through the light that emanates from our eyes that we're able to see each other, our true essence, and it's that true essence that exists within all of us. He said, but some people are spiritually blind and they can't see it. They're even afraid to look into the eyes of another because they're afraid to find what they might see, not only within that individual, but what might be reflected of their own countenance. So this was a story about Timaeus having his talk with Socrates, and Jesus is recounting it because everybody is familiar with it. They're familiar with the Jewish stories, and they're familiar with the Greek stories in their context. And so he's pointing out to them that you are afraid to look into the eyes of another because you're afraid of what you might see. And that fear has made you spiritually blind because you don't want to see that which is right before your very eyes. That big picture, that ultimate truth that is sometimes so hard to grasp. Well, the Pharisees, they weren't bad. They weren't mean. Sometimes we paint them that way. Sometimes we even make all the Jews mean, right? We become a little anti-Semitic when we read the Bible. We see Jesus is the good guy and the Jews all as the bad guys. But that wasn't really the case. The Jews were trying to protect something that they thought was right, something that was sacred. The problem wasn't in their protection of their word or of the Torah or of the law. The problem was in their interpretation. The problem was in their methodology. They dug down their claws and dug in, right? They were afraid to move. They were afraid to budge. They were afraid to face the fact that perhaps, just maybe, they could be wrong. Just like any other human being. Sometimes we're wrong. Sometimes we misinterpret. Sometimes we misjudge. Sometimes we get the story wrong. Or we hear wrong. Or we just don't want to listen. This is the story that Jesus is telling about these Pharisees who have to be schooled by this guy who is a nobody. In this story, this isn't Timaeus, this isn't Bartimaeus. This is somebody else. He got no name. He's disrespected. The Pharisees talk to him and sweep him aside. Oh, I've told you 3 times. Yeah, you're feeding us a bunch of baloney. So they bring his parents in. Is this really your kid? He was blind from birth? Oh yeah. Well, how did he do it? I don't know. He's old enough. Ask him. They didn't respect him. They were afraid of what they might hear. And so this nobody with no name stands up and says, you guys are hilarious. You're stuck on this thing about sin and about healing on the Sabbath, and here I am right before you. I was blind since I came out of my mother's womb, and today I see because some man took spit and mud and rubbed it on my eyes and told me to go to the pool of Siloam and wash, and I did it, and now I see. Amazing. But while I see you now with my own eyes, you fail to see the truth. I wonder why. And so they said, you smart mouth, get out of here. And they kicked him out of the synagogue. They booted him out. And that's why the parents were like, ask him, because they didn't want to get booted out. They knew if they got into an argument with the Pharisees, they were going to get kicked out too. And that's what happened. The son gets kicked out. Jesus hears about this and he comes to his defense. And he ridicules the Pharisees. He says, oh, you guys are so smart, are you? And they said, oh, are you calling us fools? Are you saying that we're blind? He said, oh, no. I'm not saying you're blind. You claim to see everything. You claim to know it all. And that's why you're so much worse. Because if you were blind, you could get away with it. You can plead ignorance. But you claim to know it all. And therefore your sins are all much worse. In the end, it's not about knowing it all. In the end, being awakened or gaining our sight isn't about being able to see everything perfectly, being able to judge right, being able to do what we're supposed to do. Instead, it's something that the Pharisees in this story couldn't do. And that man who was healed figured out on that day. That sometimes we just have to figure out life is tough. And we need one another. And we need God to get us through it. Because we don't have all the tools and understanding on